Well, today is Incarnation Sunday. We set aside the Sunday before Christmas to remember the birth of the Son of God and to focus in on the doctrine of the Incarnation. Now, every year we take a Sunday different throughout the year to focus in on the key doctrines that are believed to be essential to Christianity. So we have Incarnation Sunday, which today we look at the Incarnation or the humanity of Christ. We also have Resurrection Sunday, when we focus in on the resurrection of Christ. Then there is Ascension Sunday, where we focus in on the ascension of Christ. Then there's Pentecost Sunday, or New Covenant Sunday, in which we are focusing on the New Covenant of Christ. Then after that we have Trinity Sunday, where we focus on the Trinity and the divinity of Christ. And then in the end of October we have Reformation Sunday, where we're not celebrating the Reformation as such, but we are celebrating the renewal of the doctrines of the Reformation, specifically justification through faith, the justification through Christ, and the five solas and the doctrines of grace. And the five solas, of course, are by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, to the glory of God alone, as in the Scriptures alone. So these are the essential doctrines, and we believe that they are essential doctrines to Christianity. In fact, we believe that if you don't consider these to be essential, then you are no longer orthodox in terms of the Christian faith. Now, just in case some of you are not aware what the word orthodox means, the word orthodox takes its meaning from the Greek word orthos, which means right, and doxa, which means belief. So hence the word orthodox means correct belief or right thinking. So if you are orthodox, then it means you have right thinking, or you're thinking correctly about theological things. So basically, to be orthodox, you accept the teaching of the church right up to the mid-500s, and then those that were renewed during the time of the Reformation. Now, not everything of the Reformation, but the essential doctrines. If you don't believe these essential doctrines, again, you're not considered to be orthodox in your belief. And you do not accept the teaching of the historical early church and that of the reformers. So now again, just a little caution, because some of you might have in your mind that there is a church that is known as the Orthodox Church. And don't want to confuse ourselves with the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church didn't come into existence until 1054, when they split from the Catholic Church. It was called the Great Schism. And we ended up then with two, the East and the West, the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. At the time of the Reformation, there was another split among the Catholic churches, where we have the Protestant churches come into existence. So today the three main traditions of the Christian faith are the Catholic, the Roman Catholic, and the Eastern Orthodox and the Protestant churches. Now, not every church within those traditions are orthodox. That is, they don't all believe these things that we see as essential doctrines. But these are essential. That's why we remind ourselves of them every year as the calendar progresses. Now, one of the essential things that I want you to understand here about these central doctrines is that in order to be orthodox, to be right in our belief, means that we are Christological. In other words, we put Christ at the center of our beliefs. So you'll notice that when I talked about the Incarnation, I said it was the humanity of Christ. And then the resurrection of Christ, the ascension of Christ, the new covenant of Christ, the divinity of Christ, and justification through Christ. Christ has to be the center of it all. We are saved by no other means than through Jesus himself. Our whole theology must be Christological. It must be Christ-centered. And just, of course, the term Christ-centered is used by a lot of different groups and kind of used without real focus on what it means. And we love to use it. A lot of churches put Christ-centered within their mission statement of their church. That we are a Christ-centered church. And it's easy to say that, but in practice to actually not believe it. But Christ-centered is a lot easier to talk about than it is to live, isn't it? In fact, in the mundane moments of everyday life, it's a lot easier to focus on our lives and on this world than it is to focus on Christ. And the world seems to compete with Christ to become center stage in our own lives. So a Christ-centered life begins with realizing that the source of everything we are is in the Lord. He created us. He owns us. He gifted us with talents. He authors our story. And every blessing that we receive comes from Him. A Christ-centered life means that a person, specifically Jesus Himself, is the motivation for everything that we think, do, and say. A Christ-centered life has one ultimate goal, that Jesus gets the glory. It is not wrong to pursue personal goals, of course, but the glory of Christ is the orienting compass that gives direction to all of our goals in life. So everything needs to give God the glory. And when Christ is centered in our lives, that takes precedence over anything that we want for ourselves. A Christ-centered life exalts Jesus. Because we want to, a Christ-centered life centers in on doctrine, the doctrine that centers around Christ. It's His storyline of the Bible. The Old Testament drives us to Him. The New Testament focuses on Him. And the present and the future, we are waiting for Him. So to be Orthodox is to be Christ-centered in all of our theology. That's a good introduction. We could probably end there, right? But alas, I got more pages. So today we're going to take another look at the Incarnation. And I'm going to take a more systematic approach this morning rather than an exegetical approach to the Scriptures. Although you must understand that the verses that we're going to look at have been exegetically looked at to make sure that they are saying what they're saying that they're saying. So the doctrine of the Incarnation can be described. What happened here?
Long time.
Long time.
What happened?
Excuse me a second. There we go. Well, that was very weird. Okay, where was I? Oh, yes. So the doctrine of the Incarnation can be described in 5 different words. And so this morning we're going to take a look at the 5 key words of the Incarnation. So after we've studied these 5 words, you're going to know everything there is to know about the doctrine of the Incarnation. Is that a good route to go? Sound good? All right, so here are the 5 words. Incarnate, Parthenos, hypostatic, kenosis, and theophany. Okay, now you're really going, whoa! Those are some big words. But they are the theological words, but we're going to understand them simply as well. So understanding these 5 words will give you a complete and thorough understanding of the doctrine of the Incarnation. So let me just give you, by way of introduction here, a common theme that during the Christmas season always centers around the Old Testament prophecy of Isaiah 7:14. Okay, everybody knows it. Therefore the Lord Himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Okay, Emmanuel, exactly. And this seems to be the focus here. And the announcement of the angel to Joseph that we read in Matthew chapter 1, verse 23. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. So Emmanuel, God with us. So the central truth of the doctrine of the Incarnation is that God has come to dwell with man by becoming a man. Now that, of course, leads to a lot of questions. Questions like, how can God do that since God's a spirit and he's not subject to time? Have you ever thought of that? How does the humanity of Jesus and the deity of the Son of God fit together? Is Jesus part God and part man? Is he 90% God and 10% man? Or is he 90% man and 10% God? Did Jesus sacrifice some of his humanity to remain deity? Or did he sacrifice some of his deity to become human? Does God inhabit a human body, or does he mix his divine nature with the human nature? If he retained full humanity and deity, which one actually had control? And for that matter, why did God have to even become a man? Could he have accomplished redemption some other way? And one other question is why the seemingly drastic means that God went through in order for the eternal God, who is not bound by time, to now be bound by time, and then only to die. It just seems awfully drastic, doesn't it? In fact, from the outside, the world looking in at us says it's just too ridiculous to believe. So these are all great questions, and they're questions that the early church struggled with, and they came up with some great answers for us to help us to understand it. In fact, one of the best things of church history is it shows to us that truth grows out of falsehood. So you come up with an idea, you batter it against the scriptures, declare whether it's right or wrong, and when you declare it wrong, you go on to the next thought and so forth. And now you have the boundaries set forth that is able to help us to understand the truth. All right, so let's take a look at the first word, the word incarnate. So the first term comes from the Latin word, is the Latin word incarnate, and it's the word which we get our English word incarnation. You probably figured that out, didn't you? The Latin word is made up of the preposition in and the noun carne, which means flesh. So in other words, the meaning of incarnate is in flesh. In flesh. So the word incarnation is the biblical understanding that the Son of God took on human flesh. In other words, he became a man. All right, he became a man. So it finds its meaning in John 1:14, which we've read earlier. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And John 1:14 cannot be fully appreciated, of course, without looking at verse 1 of John. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 14, and the Word became flesh. So that there's no misunderstanding there. This is God becoming man, taking on flesh so that he now appears in the form of a man. So Christmas is about the incarnation of the Son of God, who was born in Bethlehem and given the name Jesus by his parents, Mary and Joseph. But Christmas is so much more than just the birth of a baby. It's about God coming to dwell, coming to tabernacle with men by becoming a man. So it is about God, Emmanuel. So just a question here in the Old Testament, how did God dwell among men? Yeah, exactly right, Joanne. In the Holy of Holies of the tabernacle or the temple. That was the only place that God dwelled. And but now through Jesus, he is able to dwell among men, to walk among men, to be seen and beheld by men. In the Old Testament, if you looked at God, you would surely die. You could not stand before God. But in Jesus, you can. And so this is a marvelous, wonderful thing. There's something supernatural about this. And there's something salvific about this. It's the greatest event to occur in the history of the universe, without parallel. So the statement in John 1:14 that the Word became flesh indicates that, of course, that he had a real body. It wasn't pretend, it wasn't fake, it wasn't something that was just on the outside, but it was a real body. He had skin, he had bones, he had toes and fingers, a nose, two little eyes, and yes, he did cry in the manger. Even though the Christmas lullaby would have us believe that he didn't cry, no crying he made, but he did. Have you heard Phil Wickman's version of Away in the Manger? Yes. He titles it Away in the Manger Forever All Men. It's really good. His second verse goes like this. The cattle are lowing, the baby awakes, the dawn of salvation beginning to break. I love thee, Lord Jesus, O gift from above, the King of the heavens, forever with us. Isn't that great? That's really good. Anyway, so God is becoming man. Another text that is really important, if you have your Bibles, turn to 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16.
Got it.
You got it, Jacob?
Yeah.
Good. 1 Timothy 3:16, okay? Look that one up.
Okay.
Okay. Don't you love it when your children want to open the Bible, even before they can read? You got it?
Yeah.
Good boy. It says, great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of godliness. And what is the mystery? He was manifested in the flesh. So it is definitely a mystery. It's not something that we can thoroughly understand. And there is a mystery surrounding it. Just like there's mystery surrounding the doctrine of the Trinity, there's mystery surrounding the doctrine of the Incarnation. Paul gives us another significant passage in Galatians chapter 4. If you want to flip over there, Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. Galatians 4, verse 4. Paul says, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman. So there's three different thoughts that are put there. God sent his Son, again identifying the Trinity, born, taking on becoming a person, and born of woman, to identify that we are in fact human. He became a human being. So God sending his Son presupposes that God had a son. There are some people who believe that Jesus didn't exist until he was born in the manger. But no, he is eternal. And this tells us it presupposes that God had a son. He can't send him if he didn't already have him. So the Son, the second person of the Trinity, was the Son in his eternal relationship with the Father, not because he was born of Mary, but because he always existed. Right? And we've got to make sure we get that straight. Yes, God sent forth his Son from his throne on high, from his position of heavenly glory. God did not send one forth in his birth, who in his birth became his Son, but who sent one who through all eternity was his Son. So a very important fact. Centuries before Jesus was born, the prophet Isaiah wrote about him in Isaiah 9:6, for unto us a child is born, to us a son is given. A son is given. All right, that's the first word. Let's go on to the second word, Parthenos. Parthenos is the Greek word for virgin. For virgin. And of course, Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary. So if the incarnation of the Son of God is the fact of the matter, that God became a man, the virgin birth is the method by which he became a man. Luke chapter 1, of course, gives us this account. So if you want to turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 1, look at verse 26. Luke chapter 1, verse 26. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. Down to verse 31. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. And Mary said to the angel, well, how will this be, since I am a virgin? And the angel answered her, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So here we have this last verse says that the power of the Holy Spirit will overshadow you. The word to overshadow is a word that is talking about an envelopment, like the cloud. It's the same word that's used in the Transfiguration. When the cloud descended upon all of the disciples and overshadowed them. It's the same words to describe Jesus at the ascension, that the cloud overshadowed him and drew him up into heaven. It's a word that reminds us of the cloud, the glory cloud, the Shekinah glory of God from the Old Testament, and where the power of God exists. And so in this whole aspect of the virgin birth, it's telling us that it is a miraculous power of God. Not by human means, but by godly and supernatural means. One thing to note here is that this text does not tell us what happened in the womb, or does it intend to tell us what happened within the room. It's only telling us that it was a miraculous thing that was happening. So now we can, of course, speculate about how and why, and there's lots of people that have, and leads to all different things, but you got to be careful that speculations don't become the essence of your theology. I think that the reason God kept it a mystery is because it is something that we cannot understand. And so as a mystery, we have to accept the tension that is brought forth by it. Does that mean that the only thing that we know for certain here, or that we can imply with any kind of certainty, is that, of course, is that the man was not involved. This has led some to conclude that Jesus was born a virgin so that he would not inherit the sin nature or the depraved nature, which we all inherit through Adam. And that's very possible. In fact, it's very evident that Jesus, when he was on this earth, did not have a depraved nature. And so the question comes in, well, how can he represent us if he didn't have a depraved nature? Well, he represents us because he is the second Adam. If you remember, before Adam sinned, he did not have a depraved nature either. And so Jesus, as the second Adam, does not have the depraved nature. Adam was tempted to become like God by eating the fruit. So there was food involved. When Jesus was taken into the wilderness and Satan came to him, he tempted Jesus to turn the stones into loaves of bread. So the food was involved again. But what was his temptation? His temptation was to use his divine power when he had come to be like us. You and I don't have divine power to turn stones into bread when we're hungry. And so Jesus is not going to do that either. He's representing us. And so the temptation for him is when he's hungry is to use his divine power. But it's the same thing, to act like God. And for Adam, to be like God. And so he suffered. He did, in fact, go through. You can go through all of the various temptations to see the parallels. But Jesus did live exactly like us, and we'll understand more about that when we get to one of the other words. Psalm 51:5, of course, says, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." So it is even questionable within the Scriptures whether the sin nature is passed on only through the father. It doesn't. This might indicate that the sin nature can also come through the mother. That we get it from both sides. And certainly, not only is the guilt of the father's sin being passed on to us, but the guilt of the mother's sins as well. And so we just don't know if original sin comes only through the Bible. Now, personally, and this is my own personal opinion, so I don't base it on, although it's based on what I think the Scriptures teaches and overall. But I think that God didn't require Mary's egg. That I think that God determined what Jesus would look like long before he ever created anything. He built the creation based on what Jesus as a man would eventually look like. God had mapped out the DNA of humanity in Christ. And part of being created in the image of God back in Genesis 1, it's more than just taking on the attributes of God, but it is actually taking on the physical human image of Jesus himself. So that we all have a DNA, which is similar to that of Christ. Adam was created by the Word of God in power in an instant. Jesus was created in an instant as, I believe, an embryo and placed in Mary's womb so that he could experience everything that we experience, including the very trauma of birth itself. I mean, if you just think about it, the first time that God ever felt any kind of stress or trauma as a human being was when he was born. From then on, he felt cold. He felt the loving embrace of a mother. He got bruises when he fell down. He felt the pain of a wood sliver when he was working with wood. He got tired. He got hungry. Everything that we feel as human beings, Jesus felt as well, because he was born from a woman's womb. He became the smallest form of man that could possibly be, and then lived as a man. All right, let's go on to, the third word then is the word hypostatic. Hypostatic. Now, this third term comes from the Greek word hypostasio, which means substance or nature. Substance or nature. So we talk about a human nature, we talk about a divine nature. So it's the essence or the being, the ontology of who we are. And we are born with a sinful nature. We don't love God. We don't want to know God. We want nothing to do with God. So we have to be regenerated and given a new nature, which is what Ezekiel and Jeremiah tell us happens at salvation. Jesus, being the Son of God, being the second person of the Trinity, was a person. He had his own nature. He had the God nature, the same as the Father and the same as the Holy Spirit. So theologians, of course, they talk about the hypostatic union then of the two natures of Christ, so the divine nature and the human nature. And the question is, how were they actually united? The humanity of Jesus is essential then to the character of Jesus as the Christ. So in 2 John chapter 1 verse 7, in 2 John 1:7, it specifically states to us that those who deny the humanity of Jesus are in fact false teachers. Okay, it says, for many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. So Jesus is God in the flesh. So if you deny the humanity of Christ, then you're a false believer. In the same respect, if you deny the deity of Christ, you are a false believer. So the Bible teaches both, that Jesus is both divine and human. Galatians 4 and 5 that we looked at before, verse 4 says, when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of the woman, born under the law. And verse 5 adds, to redeem those who are under the law. So he had to be 100% human and experience what we experience in order to be the Savior of men. If he's going to die on the cross as our substitute, then he has to be 100% able to substitute for us. Some people think that the two natures of Christ mingled into a different person, or that he was only partly man and partly God. And whenever you do that, then the question becomes, well, who actually died on the cross? And did he die in fullness to be able to represent all of us? And of course, only a divine person could bear up under the wrath of God on the cross. Now, the early church, of course, struggled with this. They rejected the the first thing that came along was a false teaching known as Apollinarianism. It taught that Jesus had a divine nature but not a human nature, even though he lived in a human body. So that the phrase became God in a bod. And there's a lot of people that believe that. Okay, he didn't have a human nature. It was just God's nature, the divine logos, in the mind, in the conscience of the human body. There wasn't a human mind. Well, then, of course, this teaching denies the full humanity of Christ, and therefore, again, he couldn't be tempted the same way as we were, nor could he even be our high priest. They also grappled with the teaching of Nestorianism, which taught that Jesus had two persons with two natures. So he's kind of a schizophrenic. So there was one person which was human, and then there was the other person which was divine, and sometimes he showed up as the human person, and sometimes he showed up as the divine person. Well, of course, the big question then is, well, which one did they put on the cross? Was it the human person or the divine person? And of course, the human... and in an attempt to unite the two natures of Jesus, a man by the name of Eutychus, he taught that the divine nature and the human nature were actually mixed together. So it's like you take the divine nature and put it in a bowl, and take the human nature and put it in a bowl and mix it all around, and you come up with a brand new nature, which they call the humane nature. Human and divine, humane nature. So now again, that denies his total humanity. It also denies his total divinity. It's essential for our salvation that Jesus be fully God and fully man. So sometimes the more contrast you have, as I mentioned earlier, the more clarity that you can actually get. And so as the church worked through these things through the first 400 to 500 years of the early church, they were able then to determine what was right and what was wrong. It was very easy once they discussed it and compared it with scriptures what was wrong, and this allowed them to be able to set the boundaries to know where they cannot go so that they can better state what they do believe. So the church waited for all these heresies to come along so that they knew how to state it correctly. And anybody know what document was produced that states the conclusion? Starts with C-H. Who said it? John, yes, the Chalcedon. The Chalcedon, now what's it called? Chalcedon. Anyways, the thing that came out of Chalcedon. That's exactly right. So I encourage you to read that. It's much more clear than the Apostles' Creed because it definitively talks about the deity of Jesus and the humanity and how they two fit together, and uses words that totally destroys all of these other views. So Jesus has always existed as the Son of God, fully God and equal with the Father and the Spirit. At the Incarnation, Jesus became a human being. The human nature was added to the divine nature. This is what the hypostatic union means, is that they didn't unite to become a different nature, but they were added together. So the divine Son of God, the human nature was added to him, so that he became a man right from forever and for eternity. It can never be torn apart. This is what Jesus is. He's the God-man. And this is the hypostatic union. That Jesus Christ is one person, but he's fully God and fully man. Jesus' two natures, his human and divine, are inseparable. He will forever be the God-man, fully God and fully human, with two distinct natures in one person. And of course, he'll be that without loss of any kind of separate identity as the Son of God or as the Son of Man. And Jesus sometimes operated, of course, within the limitations of his humanity. In fact, most of the time Jesus lived within the limitations of humanity, but other times he did exercise godly attributes, his divine attributes, when he healed a person. But we're going to understand that more when we get to the next word. But Jesus, he had the two natures. So the doctrine of the hypostatic union is an attempt to explain how Jesus could be both God and man at the same time. It is ultimately, though, a doctrine we are incapable of fully understanding. It is impossible for us to fully understand how God works. All right, so let's go to the fourth word, the word kenosis. So the incarnation of the Son of God is the fact of the matter that God became a man. The virgin birth is the method by which he became a man. The hypostatic union is the term used to describe how the Son of Man took on a human nature, yet remained fully God at the same time. The term kenosis tells us how Jesus functioned as both God and man. So the word kenosis is the Greek word kanao. I jumped way down out of my, which means to empty. So the major text is in Philippians, and we'll look at that in a moment. We already know from John 1 that the Word of God was and is God, and that the Word of God became man. He's both fully God, fully man. This fact, however, causes, again, some more questions. One question, for instance, in Luke chapter 2, verse 40, it tells us that Jesus grew and became strong and filled with wisdom, or increased in wisdom. So if Jesus is totally God and full of wisdom and all knowledge, how can he grow in wisdom? That's a good question. Well, again, we have to separate the two natures. In his humanity, does he have all wisdom? No. In his divinity, he does. Okay? If in his humanity he doesn't access his divine nature, then in his humanity doesn't know all things either. So he needs to grow in wisdom. So if you look at Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 to 8, this text explains to us how the two natures operated while he was on the earth. Philippians 2, verses 5 to 8. Verse 5, the very last two words, Christ Jesus, verse 6, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing. That's the word kenosis. Made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of man, and being found in human form. So the text tells us there that before the incarnation of Jesus, he was in the form of God. Verse 6. He was in the form of God. We can understand that. He was the second person of the Trinity. He was fully God, yet he was not the Father and not the Son, but all three of them were equal. From the beginning, he had the nature of God. He can never cease to be God. We've got to understand, he cannot cease to be God. Some people think that the kenosis theory is that Jesus got rid of his deity, which would mean that he ceased to be God, and he can't do that. If he seemed to be divine, which there were times in his life that he seemed to be divine, it is because he is divine. He is God. So verse 6 also says that he did not count equality with God something to be grasped, to hold on to. In other words, he's not talking here about his divine nature, but he's talking about laying aside what it essentially means to be God, or to act like God 100% of the time. He didn't think that he needed to hold on to that in order to represent us as our man. And that's what he didn't do. Verse 7 tells us what he did do. Verse 7 says, but he made himself nothing, or literally, he emptied himself. He emptied himself. The verb emptied is the word that we're looking at here for kenosis. It's better here, though, to think of Christ's emptying of himself as a laying aside of the privileges that were his as God. Laying aside the privileges. Okay, rather than stay in heaven and on his throne, what did he do? He descended to the earth to live on the earth. Rather than to stay in this full godly form, he took on a human form. Rather than to always be exercising his full deity and his full nature as God, he set aside the privilege or the right to exercise his full deity all the time. So when he came to earth, the ESV says he made himself nothing. The New Living Translation says he gave up his divine privileges, which would be a better way of putting it. So he veiled his glory. He chose to occupy the position of a slave, verse 7 tells us. The kenosis was the self-renunciation, not an emptying of himself of deity, nor was it an exchange of deity for humanity. Jesus never ceased to be God during any part of his earthly ministry. John 5:19, Jesus said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise." So one way of saying this is that Jesus gave up the independent use of his divine attributes. So that's why how we can explain situations like in Matthew 8 when the woman with the issue of blood touched his garment. And Jesus said, "Who touched me?" Well, did Jesus not know? Well, as the Son of God, he would know. But as a man, he wouldn't know. Why wouldn't he know? Because he laid aside his divine attributes so that they did not interfere with him to be able to live as a man, to be able to represent you and I fully. It's also why in Matthew 24, when the disciples asked him about the second coming, Jesus said, "Nobody knows when the second coming will occur, not the angels, nor the Son, but only the Father." Well, in what sense can the Son not know? Well, only in his human sense. Certainly he knows in his divine sense. But at that point, he was not meant to know, because he was to live his life in anticipation of the future, just like you and I do. Jesus could see into the hearts of people. When he did that, he was exercising his divine attributes. You and I can't. So the majority of the time he didn't. He didn't know what was going on in the hearts of people. So with the kenosis, Jesus provided an example of how we should live, which is in complete dependence upon God for everything, including knowledge and wisdom and that we need. So when it comes to the kenosis, too, sometimes we just focus on what he gave up, which was the independent use of his divine attributes, but it also tells us something that he took on. And Jesus added to his divine nature again, the human nature. So you'll often read in the scholarly reports that Jesus added, or that they added to his divine nature, the human nature. Okay. Well, let's go to the last word here in the head. So, empty. The word theophany. Now, this it's got an indirect connection to the doctrine of the Incarnation. But what it's referring to is a theophany is an appearance. It comes from the word which means appearance. Theos is God, and the rest of the word means appearance. So it's a God appearance. So throughout the Old Testament, you often read of times when a person, sometimes identified as the angel of the Lord, appeared, and it was identified or certain that he himself was God. So there were these times in the Old Testament when God appeared in human form. These are theophanies, or sometimes called Christophanies. And so people have said, well, if God can appear instantaneously as a human in the Old Testament, then why did he need to go through the process of a virgin birth to become a man? Well, there are some things to consider about this. The first thing is that the Old Testament theophanies are preliminary. Okay, so that they foreshadow and they prefigure the coming of Christ in the flesh. The coming of Christ is their fulfillment. It's their climax. We might say that Jesus Christ is the final theophany. It's the final appearance of God in a permanent form. So the Old Testament theophanies are preliminary. Secondly, the Old Testament theophanies of God were temporary, and usually for a very specific purpose. So when the angel came and wrestled with Jacob, when that night was over, he disappeared. And it was for a temporary and specific purpose. We know again that God dwelt within the Holy of Holies. Whereas when Jesus came, he came to dwell with humanity. He came as the temple of God, to produce the temple of God. He was Emmanuel with us. Christ's incarnation is permanent, whereas the theophanies were temporary. The Old Testament looks forward to the New, and not only by direct predictions, but also by symbols that depict beforehand aspects of who Christ is and what he will do to accomplish redemption. So there was no salvation possible through any of the theophanies. It could only happen through Christ. And the fact that God could come as a man is symbolized or predicted in the theophanies of the Old. In the Old Testament, the theophany was a messenger of the Lord. And although he appeared as a human, he really was not a real human. He had not taken on a human nature. It probably was more likely God in a bod. And that didn't matter because, again, redemption was not at stake. Only in the Incarnation could God fulfill all the requirements for Jesus to become the Savior. So Jesus then is the fulfillment of all previous appearances of God to permanently dwell with man as Emmanuel. So everything in the theophanies, they were temporary, but Christ's humanity is permanent and eternal. So the incarnation of the Son of God is the fact of the matter. God became a man. The virgin birth is the method by which he became a man. The hypostatic union is the term used to describe how the Son of Man took on a human nature, yet remained fully God at the same time. The term kenosis tells us how Jesus functioned as both God and man, and a theonomy helps us to understand why God had to become a man. Well, in conclusion then, Jesus is the most important person who has ever lived. He is the Savior. He is God in human flesh. He's not half God and half man. He is fully God and fully man. In other words, Jesus had two distinct natures, divine and human. Jesus is the Word who was God and was with God and was made flesh. This means that in the single person of Jesus, he has both a human and divine nature. He is both God and man. There's a lot of repetition in this, isn't it? Because there's a great emphasis here. The divine nature was not changed when the Word became flesh. Instead, the Word was joined with humanity. Jesus' divine nature was not altered. Jesus is not merely a man who had God within him, nor is he man who manifested the God principle. He is God in flesh, the second person of the Trinity. The Son, Hebrews 1:3, the Son is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. That's the word hypostasio. And he upholds the universe by the word of his power. Jesus' two natures are not mixed together, nor are they combined to create a new nature. They are separate, yet they act as a unit in the one person of Jesus. And because of all of this, he became the perfect sacrifice and the perfect substitution for you and me on the cross, that we might be saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ alone. As the divine Son, he alone satisfies God's own judgment against us and the demand for perfect obedience. As the incarnate Son, he alone can identify with us as our substitute and representative. Our hope for salvation, for the full payment of our sin, and our full restoration with God is only accomplished in Jesus Christ, our Lord. So the question today is, have you put your trust and faith in Jesus alone? Amen.